Live now?
Yep, that's us. Well, live on
Oh,
Facebook at the moment. We're going to be speaking about the stuff to do with Hong Kong and, of course, China and the current events regarding the economics. So, uh, of course, I'd like to welcome back Mike on. Of course, he's originally from Hong Kong. Some of you might remember the first live stream we had and went through a number of questions and stuff. So, uh, yeah, I mean, let's get talking about the whole thing to do with current events and what's happening with the Chinese Communist Party and everything in regards to, um, well, as you know, just the current events. As you know, Hong Kong has sadly lost its freedom. Since then, I think there's been a lot of people from Hong Kong that have came here. That's another thing I should note. So yeah, I mean, what have you got to say on the current state of affairs, Mike?
well, first of all, thanks for having with me. Also, I am very happy to say that now I have the chance to like uh, to use Scottish platform again and to talk about the situation. And it is obviously it will be well. Last time we talked about quite a lot of things about economics. Because I will also answer some of the questions first because I have a few questions pop up in my inbox from my friends who want me to also explain that. The
Yep.
situation of Hong Kong, of course. Last time we didn't have a chance to go through to the political side of the whole matter.
Uh huh.
We will going to dive into more. Obviously, we will naturally get back to the situation of the CCP. There is a common misunderstanding that the CCP is how do you put it in this way? A collective unity that never be broken, or something like that. But there are different factions of the CCP, and there is a lot of objectives from different parts of the CCP. We will go through that, and we will also talk about that. This relate to Hong Kong because sadly, based on what I've seen so far, the situation of Hong Kong has become the battleground of different one of the battlegrounds. Of course, you have many battlegrounds of the CCP's internal fight within itself, and that is hugely problematic because we have to understand that communist fight is always ugly. We're not talking about only CCP itself. We talk about historically from the Soviet Union to the Eastern Bloc. Um, the problem is that now it's basically Hong Kong become one of the battleground, and it is very very ugly to say at least. So it is a hugely problematic thing, and the problem is that we have issue that the well-intended policies or people has been hijacked by certain people, and they are, I would dare to say, control the oppositions in one way. So that's why we get into this a very very problematic situation right now, and obviously we're going to dive into talk more about that. But first, I suppose I have to the format I suppose will be very similar. Once I talk about something, and then I will going to have a small Q&A, and then we'll to interact with our audience, and that is the thing. And also, I do not know whether I've said it at the beginning. I once again thank Scotty that I will be coming back on around once a month to talk about the situation over in the Far East. In general, about for Hong Kong, we'll talk about some economics topics. We'll talk about international relations. Uh, I know it's a relatively broad topic, well, which I deliberately let that to happen because I do not want to confine only in Hong Kong. Hong Kong is a very interesting place. Because Hong Kong is still considered one of the places to have one of the most many spies within one city. And if you take a look at Hong Kong today, all the consulate general that's sent to there, they are all ambassador level. Because you have to understand that you can only send an ambassador to a capital place of a country. Hong Kong, strictly speaking, is not that country, so you cannot send an ambassador. You can only send a consulate general. But the level of how do you say the level of regards because you have different levels. You go and take a look and review what their backgrounds were. Then you know that they are all ambassadors, ambassador level. So it is a very interesting thing to say that how we are going to review these things, and that's why it's very, very complicated. We talk about economics, we talk about politics, we'll talk about the infight. I mean, and especially next year is very, very important for the whole CCP or even the Far East or even the whole world. Because actually not many people actually notice that next year is the 20th Congress of the CCP. Now, what does matter? That basically marks the end of the current term of Xi's general secretary. So who will be the next general secretary? Now, this is a big question. We will obviously talk about that. And perhaps you have any question yourself, Scotty, because I will have to also share the thing out first because I'm not managed to share it, but I haven't created a post to share it. But you have any question or you have something you want to say?
Yeah,
then,
I mean,
while I'm sharing the things out, yeah.
I mean, this is the thing. I mean, it's quite important because, as you've just explained there, with regards to the current situation in Hong Kong and sadly what's happened ever since the end of the lease in '97 and the progressive government intervention, and eventually you've just been seeing, Hong Kong losing more and more of its freedom as such to that of the Chinese Communist Party. They are definitely having a lot more influence, and they've basically taken by force. You've seen that yourself, is why so many people from Hong Kong, and you probably noticed of recent, many of those from Hong Kong, even some of my favourite YouTubers that I watched, they used to be on Digital Rev, photographers and that. They actually left and they came here to Britain, and many others had came here, and thankfully they got citizenship and stuff like that. But it's been the entire issue where China's been taking more and more control, and their ultimate agenda, and this is the point obviously you're getting at, their ultimate agenda is they're wanting to go back to what it was like under Mao's China. They want to go back to full-blown communism, and that's the threat. So what do you have to say? And even with regards to, you'll probably have noticed as well that they might even test flying planes over the top of Taiwan, because Taiwan, as you know, used to be part of China, and the history, the complicated, because you're saying about the infighting, because that's similar.
You do remind me about this, talk about the situation of Taiwan and the situation of Hong Kong, and then about the BNO cases. Do remind me, because there are many things I want to talk about. That is, sometimes it is the problem. My problem, not your problem. My problem is that I read a lot of stuff and I make a lot of notes, but not quite organized. So do remind me and the audience, if I did miss out, remind me, about the things that what I've seen, what I read, and what I understand, because we have seen some very, very how should you say, strange situation happen. So I would definitely want to go and talk about it. There's no question about that at all.
Yep. So basically, I mean, this is obviously the important thing is obviously the current situation, as you know, of what's happening in Hong Kong. How are situations, since then, because obviously there's been the whole pandemic and everything that came along, and the lockdowns and whatnot. What do you think? Because obviously you probably have family still over there, if I'm right.
Yes, I still have people over there, although sadly my father passed away for non-COVID reasons. That's all right. I appreciate that. Your condolences and not non-COVID issues on. And but I would argue this is this is the end result of the COVID lockdown. What happened is because he had a lung cancer, and when you have a lockdown, things got delayed. Just like what happened in the UK, because you prioritize everything. And if you prioritize everything, you start to have other thing else, and that's the problem. But anyway, back to the point. Well, the situation, first of all, the lockdown is a very bizarre thing. If you have noticed that actually the lockdown now, the current Hong Kong government policies is basically they aiming for a bizarre zero COVID case strategy, which I believe this is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, we all know that there's no way that you can go down to zero. This is not a SARS. Okay, this is not 2003. Because the difference is that the SARS, all you have to do is to stop the super spreader, track and trace, problem solved it. This one is not. This is more like a flu type of a spread. That when I say flu, I'm not saying exactly like a flu. Okay, I make myself very clear about it. I'm saying flu type of spread. Okay, so it is much more complicated, and things are only. You cannot aim for zero cases, just like you cannot aim for flu zero cases. The same thing. And because they aim for a zero cases, because they want to prioritize the connection between the Hong Kong and the PRC to resume the freedom of movement between the PRC and Hong Kong. Right. So that's why they aim for this policy. That's become very problematic because now, for example, like if you come from places like UK, you want to go to Hong Kong, you need to have a 21-day quarantine, hotel quarantine, with you pay the expenses, you the traveler, okay. So that's why, unfortunately, I missed my father's funeral. I mean, we're not talking about the money, and not to mention by the 21 days by the time the funeral is already done. You see the point. So that's the problem, and that's why this is a very problematic thing. And not to mention about that, in my perspective, this is just a tool for the Hong Kong government to stop the. You can say it's one way as a way to stop people to go out. The people inside Hong Kong go out because they will say that, look, if you go out, you have 21 days to come back.
So yeah, I mean, what you're basically saying is the way things are going at the moment is that, you know, things are starting to become the power is starting to centralise more towards the Chinese Communist Party. What they are, you know, dictating, in other words, when it comes to the COVID policy and stuff like that, and you're forced to, you know, go into, you know, isolation for a period if you were to visit there, and what you're saying is that you would be forced to pay for it all.
Yes, and just to get a point, similar countries around similar areas, Japan and Singapore, they dropped the quarantine period to 10 days now. I mean, even some of the scholars over in Hong Kong had questioned whether 21 days is really that required. I mean, one of them even go on to record to saying that the only reason that they have do it in that person's perspective is because they're trying to deter people to come in, really. Because they're creating a gap. But I will even add on that point to argue that the purpose of that is to try to determine people to go out. Because once you cannot go out, then when you have to go out and come back for 21 days, what happened is that you have a huge cost of it. You're not talking about your transportation. We're talking about your cost of quarantine. At the height of the quarantine, the number of people have to quarantine will reach to a point that you only have presidential suite of a 5-star hotel is available. Can you imagine how much you're going to spend on it? So this is the point, and that's why I said that in my perspective, they are trying to use the pandemic as a way to control people to go out.
Yeah, I can see what you mean. I mean, it's one of these things that obviously they're using it as a means of control, and they're doing that with elsewhere. You're definitely seeing that, you know, here in Britain, and you know, I'm surprised because, as you know, I voted, you know, no to Scottish independence because you know, the perception in mainstream media, you know, kind of gives of everything to do with, you know, Scotland is that Scotland's more left wing. That's the image that the mainstream media paint, and I was kind of getting that impression because a lot of the video responses I was doing, it was all these, you know, anti-Thatcherites, and I'm not saying Thatcher was perfect or not, that's far off the case, but the image they kind of give off of Scotland is this country that's, you know, strongly in favour of like socialism. But what I've been seeing more and more of is when it came down to these, you know, restrictions and that, I'm starting to see ordinary people, just ordinary people coming out so strongly against, you know, the stuff today with the lockdowns, and they themselves are comparing it to the likes of, you know, socialist Nazi Germany, or they're comparing it to the likes of the Soviet Union and that, and they're acknowledging that it is socialism. So something is telling me that there are a lot more people out there, even here in Scotland, that are probably, although they probably don't talk much about politics, they are more, you know, perhaps that they're more conservative or whatever it may be than what the mainstream media is making it to be. And it's the same case where they've been using these lockdowns and stuff like that, in my eyes, as a means of such obsession to take more control. Because
Oh, absolutely, I agree.
yeah, and this
Yep.
is the thing, because even you've probably seen recently with that of Australia. Now look at what happened in Australia, and they laid down, lockdowns. It was more recently of what happened, and then they started the whole thing today with the whole thing
I mean,
where they can
I mean,
actually
very
go through your
simple.
social media
You
and
you
stuff.
you you, ha- you have to go to one very basic point. You got one of the I believe he's a professional governor or a first minister of Australia come out to saying that you have to go to a bar to wear a mask while you're drinking. I mean, excuse me. I mean, we can talk about with how details and how to wear face masks and all these kind of things. There are people who are arguing, debating that. That's perfectly fine. But the question is that now you either you close the bars or you allow alcohol dining, or you just say that you only lift down your mask when you're drinking. Now, we can always speak all these kind of things, whether even mask is legitimate or not. We can always have a very thorough academic debate. The question is that do you know what you're talking about? I'm not saying you. I'm saying that guy, that politician. Does you know what I'm talking about? How on earth you're supposed to be drinking a drink while you're wearing a mask? I mean, you see the point. I mean, these people can still have the audacity to say these kind of things. We can, as I've said, I know there are people who are pro mask and against mask. We know people that are we should be allowed to have a public debate on that, and I have no problem about that. But the question is that sometimes you see how these officials are. They just lost the plot completely. They are basically obsessed with their power. And my concern is how will they get this power back?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with what you're saying. It is obviously a very big, problem. And like I say, I mean, you're seeing it in the likes of Australia. I was just seeing if there's any other comments I had on. Yeah,
Sure.
just
Just
quickly
make sure that
checking them.
we also pick up the Facebook uh, uh, um, comments.
Yeah, I was just thought, because obviously I get comments from obviously both the YouTube and the
Brilliant.
Facebook and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, I completely agree with what you're basically saying, and that's part and parcel of the problem, because it didn't just be a case of, oh well, they're locking down for the sake of, people's restrictions and the mandates and all the rest of this, and now the COVID passports, and that's another story. But there
Yep.
was also the story in Australia where they're taking on what's similar to what you've been seeing with regards to, China, where
Yep.
they're now being, it's now a case where they can actually go through your social media account and stuff like that. Things that are so
Yes,
important to
this
your
is absolutely
privacy.
creepy. It's very creepy. I absolutely agree. And the whole thing is that we are just in a very bizarre way. We're in a very slippery slope. I believe we can all agree that. And obviously, now we have another case coming up that there are some academics publicly challenged the theory that to dismiss that it is potentially is a laboratory leak uh, is simply too early stage, because you might recording that now they have to come out that actually that letter who claimed that that it is impossible to be leaked from a laboratory has been now being disputed, because what happens is that all these people have a conflict of interest. All but one, I forget which one that it is, but all but one they have conflict of interest on that. They all have somehow really related, not like the 6 degree connection, okay? Like really real connection on money wise and what their people are, who are working on, or their former colleagues to the Wuhan lab. I mean, this will be concerning. Do I believe we can get this out from the Wuhan lab? No, I don't believe so. I believe they have destroyed the evidence in my perspective. But it will be very concerning. I mean, because the whole thing that we're having here is that this thing, based on one of the scientists, argued that has been designed in a way, not necessarily to be deliberately leaked out, but they say that designed in a way that is so adapted to be spread to human.
Yep.
I mean, well, we do not know. It could be just scientific experiments go horribly wrong. I'm not in a position to have any evidence to point it out that which direction they're going to, because I do not have. But there are indeed scientists who are saying that it is concerning. I mean, some would argue that we should not have ever conduct this type of experiment in the first place because it is too risky. And obviously, this goes back to the point of the risk assessment. One, if they run such an experiment, all these kind of things. And well, I mean, well, I'm not a scientist myself. I'm calling a scientist, and so I will let the scientific community to decide what they're going to do. But this is going to be a very, very difficult time. I mean, for example, like the restrictions that we just talked about, that actually yesterday I believe the ICAO and also the road haulage associations and all this kind of yes, there's a joint letter from the world. Yes, there's a transportation head joint letters called World Leaders to Secure Global Supply Chains from the IRU, ICAO, and what other it is. And this is, let me try to figure it out. Yes, there was a joint letter about that, and because they basically highlight that this cannot be sustainable. You have crew settlers on the sea for 18 months as basically unable to like get their contract done because of what is happening. That's why it is absolutely chaotic. And we haven't even talked about all these kind of things because of all these borders restrictions. And
Yep.
they're basically calling on the borders restrictions for at least these crew, road haulages, and the both ship and the air crew to be lift up, because you can't go ahead like this for long.
Something out of interest. I mean, obviously, with regards to, and this is another question, and just what the church in the end times had basically rightly stated there. Said people's freedoms have been destroyed in the UK, and that's completely right. This is the very reason why you need to reduce the size and power of the state in that. And he also goes on to say 40 millimeter is it mics were used to shoot at children in Australia. The kind of
Wow.
weapon special ops use, rubber bullets, have been blinded many people. I mean, that's absolutely shocking. I mean, this is the type of stuff that's been used against, and it's all in use of, and that an important note of what that person just stated there is the fact that they stripped the Australian people of their right to bear arms. That's why they do that, and they do that through every. You ever notice every socialist regime that does that? Doesn't matter whether it's Nazi Germany, the Soviet Union. Doesn't matter. Every socialist regime has got an agenda to strip you of your right to bear arms, and the main reason is not for the sake of your safety. It's so that they can use the state and the police against you, and basically you've got nothing to defend yourself with, and that's exactly what you've seen with incidents like that. But an interesting question, obviously, I would have to ask yourself, and I suppose it somewhat relates with the whole, pandemic and stuff like that. But obviously, as you know, going even before that, you know yourself that in China, that they've got all that sort of, point system, the sort of reward system where
Yes, the PRC, yes, the
yeah,
social credit system.
yeah. So you have to
Yes.
basically, abide and behave yourself to fit the state's narrative, or otherwise you won't be able to travel. Has any of that taken place in Hong Kong of recent or anything? Is anything like that happened?
Well, it depends on. Let me say it this way: on paper, no, but in practice, this is a big question mark. I mean, you see, the problem is that the new national security law basically give a huge power to the police, and this is the problem. I mean, they now can even covering around the world. I mean, I don't know how they can enforce them. I mean, to be quite honest with you. But the national security law gives them quite huge power. Some people describe this as a military or law enforcement takeover because technically they are law enforcement agencies, really. The PRA should be supposed to be military. But that is the problem because they're given so much power, and because of this power, they have a very wide gap. They can, well, arguably, they do whatever they want to claim. I mean, anything can be up to the authority that's not happy. Then you can put into say that you're threatening national security and you go to jail. Now, is that even worse than the social security system? I mean,
Yeah.
in one sense it is. But the interesting thing is that I want to take the opportunity to also point one thing. They say that because of the national security law, that's why they are now a police state now. I argue that this is not the case because the police state actually happened earlier.
Yeah.
What happened is that if anyone who have a very, very close monitoring the Hong Kong situation, which I don't expect everyone is in your audience, you will find out that during the 2019-2020 riots, one night, the chief executive Carrie Lam have a press conference. Now, usually, if you as a chief executive or like the president or like the governor of a certain place, you're going to have this in your governor house, right? Or it is at the government headquarters, right? For some reason, she had it in the police headquarters. This doesn't make any sense at all. I mean, surely, that we all know the police headquarters is surrounded by protesters, okay? This is not the best way to do it. I mean, let's face it. Now, you do not have many weapons inside. You might have, but the question is still risky, okay? Why you are somehow getting to there? I mean, my feeling is that Carrie Lam has lost the real power. She no longer, she is now the figurehead or the ultimate puppy. She will be basically, in the past, she is basically rubber stamping. She still has some authority or freedom. Now she rubber stamp everything. And this will also back to the point. I believe that that will also explain why the current chief secretary of the of administration, basically number 2 of Hong Kong, is actually from the Security Bureau, the former security secretary, and the current security secretary was actually was the formerly police commissioner back then. Because in my perspective, they already taken power of that point. The thing doesn't get it right, okay? Because just like you do not see the U.S. president will go to the Pentagon to deliver a press conference. The priorities, the order of presence got it wrong. So my feeling is that point, the power switched.
Yeah, I can
Carrie Lam
understand.
is now become the ultimate puppy.
As far as I'm aware, I mean, it was even around about that same time period. Like I say, I mean, ever since '97, you've been seeing more and more of the freedom being taken away, and I think it was around about that same time period, about 2010, that you would see the introduction of the minimum wage law. And Hong Kong was doing perfectly well without it, right up to that period, and it's been one thing after another. As Thomas goes on to state, he says, we, the UK, need a closer military and economic agreements with India and the rest of the Commonwealth. With this, we could stand up to China even without the USA. I mean, I do completely obviously agree with yourself, Thomas, but I do still think we need a good, strong relationship with the United States. It's just unfortunate that they've kind of... Well, I don't know if they've got the best leader in at the moment, but I think it's important that you have strong trade relations, even and strong relations with the type of countries who, are in favour of free trade and everything like that. And yeah, I mean, I do completely agree in that sense. I mean, they are a very, very big. They are a very big threat, given the fact that they do want to go down that road of communism again, and this is the issue. I mean, just what you're speaking about there yourself, Mike. I mean, the influence that her in Hong Kong. You say she's rubber stamping and stuff. I wouldn't be surprised if that's true. I wouldn't be surprised if she's just a puppet to the Chinese Communist Party. I mean,
well, I would say that in the past you need to be blessed by the CCP. Now she's absolutely lost the control of everything. I would say that. This is my view. Obviously, I mean, I expect someone will call me conspiracy theorist, but I'm saying that I only deduce this conclusion from what I've observed from these things, because these things doesn't make any sense. And for me, that is how they run it. But just back to the point briefly about the case of we can stand up with the Commonwealth and to use it like India and the Kansas UK. The situation of on New Zealand, I'm not very sure how reliable as a partner they are. For myself, India, they are facing a challenge themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that this is not possible. I would say that without America, we're in a very difficult position to
Yeah.
do anything further else. That is the realistic point because we have a very limited resources, even though the whole Commonwealth put it together. And not to mention about that, we have to realize that some of our partners are not even very reliable, such as Canada. I mean, you have Justin Trudeau. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
recently, some people claim. Now, I must say this is a claim. I'm saying that I haven't seen enough evidence suggested that to claim that actually Canada may be somehow related to the Wuhan laboratory, or even potentially crop up to these things. Now, I must say that I didn't see evidence to suggest that. I'm saying once again, this is just a claiming by some individual. But if it does happen, that will also compromise Canada. We are in a very tight ship. That's why you see the new what? The new America, UK, Australia alliance. Like they have abbreviations, but I forgot that. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
that one that could be like trying to tie into things. Now you see the whole objective they are doing in to deal with PR. So we call the three island chains.
Mm-hmm.
Go back to the first island chain will be Korea, Japan, Taiwan, and the Vietnam and India. The first island chain. The second one will be going even further to Guam. Okay. The third one will go to Australia and Hawaii place. Now we can see why the PRC have a very strong incentive. They're trying to move on Taiwan because if they break into Taiwan, they can break the first island chain. That is what we call and the most importantly, because once you have Taiwan, you can get into the deep water Pacific place. I mean Pacific Ocean very easily. They have a direct access of it, and that is the whole point. But now that was slightly off a little bit about topic about the Taiwan situation. If we're gonna, some people ask, do you see Taiwan will be attacked very shortly? Until this point, now I have to say until this point, I'm going to get in the future. Until this point, not yet. Is that a real threat? Yes, absolutely a real threat. There's no question about that because we know the strategic advantages of PRC taking Taiwan. Is that imminent that we're saying that within tomorrow we're going to have it? Probably not. Because what happened is that if PRC practically have to take Taiwan, they must have a blitzkrieg style attack campaign like how Nazi Germany defeat Poland. They have to.
Mm-hmm.
Because once they drag their feet, then Japan could join in. Bear in mind, Japan have the collective they amended it now in terms of collective defense policies, and they could join in. And bear in mind, America. I mean, that's very important. And so that's the point. And so the more that the PRC talk, in my perspective about Taiwan, the less likely that they could maneuver on that. Because they are more than like an empty threats. I'm not saying they're empty threats. I'm saying that they basically trying to, in one sense, trying to entertain the domestic audience that they still have a very strong desire that we are going to deal with this. This is the ultimate issue and we're going to win this. Now, however, if the PRC suddenly go quiet for a period of time to not talk about Taiwan, now that is a very, very dangerous thing because they're trying to accumulate and to get it over. So if they talk about publicly loud and clear, so I will be less worried. I'm not saying this is not worrying. I mean the situation is worrying. I have to stress that. But if they go back and to retreat to less talk, now that is something the time we need to be pay extremely close attention on that because they might be building up something. And that is how I understand the Taiwan situation. Obviously, the Taiwan situation is also very complicated because the
Yeah.
Qing dynasty have get the Taiwan because the Ming dynasty originally before Qing dynasty get into they lose it to the Dutch if I remember. Not the Dutch. Basically, what happens? They were briefly beat by the Dutch. They were, and then they have become. And then when the Ming Dynasty collapsed, part of that fraction go to the Taiwan, And then they finally Qing dynasty sorted out the whole thing. They get Taiwan, but they lose it to Japan. I believe hundreds of years later. If I remember history correctly, they lose to Japan, and that is the whole thing. The only reason that why Taiwan can technically back to ROC is because Japan loses World War II.
An interesting thing to add to that with regards to the Taiwan, it was something in relation to do with because someone raised the interesting point that given the fact that Biden is currently president of the United States, it was mentioned to me that what could potentially happen is China could fly planes over Taiwan and kind of
they already did.
Just to test the water, just to test to see how the United States react.
I actually want to jump into this point. It is very interesting to see that they flying through the things. That's why I say the threat is absolutely real, and I would challenge anyone to challenge them to say this is not a real threat. This is the best evidence. But one of the state media, like I believe it's Universal Times, is basic. It's like these crazy mad Mao newspapers, the state-owned propaganda paper. They said that the red line for the PRC to launch an attack on Taiwan is when there are military planes land on Taiwan. I understand that the U.S. have landed military planes 3 times now at least on Taiwan. No action. But no, it does have action. The action is she come out to tell the Foreign Office that they have to add it in more cute and less aggressive way.
Yeah.
That is the funniest point. That's why I say that their propaganda machine had boxed them into the corner. But this is risky. I mean, you will understand that if she decided that he has been boxed into the corner and we're going to launch an attack anyway, that could be dangerous. But this point, at this moment, not yet. So, but it is absolutely a huge threat, and that's why I said that this is a big threat. Doesn't mean this is imminent, but this doesn't mean that I would downplay this threat. I hope that I communicate with our audience very clear about it, because I unlike some people who are saying that Taiwan will be always have no problem. It's just an empty threat. No. This threat is real.
So
is that imminent?
In relation, obviously, because I just get obviously. A comment there.
Just to one more point, and I will respond to comment.
Yep.
Recently, a few weeks ago, there was an SCMP paper, South China Morning Post, that is based in Hong Kong.
Mm-hmm.
And later the article retracted, by the way, but the content was about that there was a source told the paper from the military, the PRA, to suggesting that they refused to endorse the actions taken by the Foreign Office of the PRC. That's very interesting. I mean, of course, they have been retracted, but this is a very interesting development, because traditionally, we have the so-called the party-directed gun policy. Basically means that whoever in charge of the military, who is the real supreme leader of the Communist Party, if some of the people in the military start to having problem with that, that could mean that in my interpretation, is that someone in the military trying to tell the world that if she has big movement, a coup is possible. Of course, this article being retracted, and I'm not surprised that all these articles will be retracted, because most of people doesn't realize that SCMP is now owned by Jack Ma. Through Jack Ma through some organization.
I've seen obviously
that. So that's a better way to say. But ultimately, it's still owned by Jack Ma. Relevant entities. Although I argue, and some reliable diplomatic sources pointed out that Jack Ma actually is just a proxy. He's representing some of the CCP elderly or seniors or CCP top factions. Some of the CCP factions who hold the interest. He's not the real owner.
Yeah, it's interesting you mention about Jack Ma, because he was one of them that, he disappeared for a good spell, and then came out and somewhat apologised to the Chinese Communist Party or something like that. He recently reappeared or something, and there was that thing about Jack Ma. That's how I obviously heard about him. I know obviously the CCP, they obviously have a large influence within business in obviously China. Much is state owned and controlled and everything. So I completely agree. Um, Obviously Craig was just saying, how you doing, Scott, mate? The whole wearing mask regulations is a total joke. Completely agree. I mean this is the thing. It's just similar to elsewhere, even Australia and everything, and something has my suspicions up. You know, I'm not just saying this, but something has my suspicions up, because there was someone, and I'm not going to name any names, but our kid came home from school one day with something to do with Mandarin, you know, the Chinese language, and Nigel Farage had brought up about how they were, you know, they bought over certain schools here in Britain, and they were using, I don't know, I don't know if it was like certain propaganda to try and paint a positive image of Chinese communists. You know,
Yep, sure.
basically
And
that's
also
what they
the
were doing,
Confucius Institute.
and that's the reason why I'm very suspicious with regards to the SNP, because why would it not surprise me that Nicola Sturgeon would bow down to them? Like, she's that weak. She honestly is that weak. She would bow down to, you know, that she would literally side with the Chinese just over the sake of, you know, over Britain. Just that's who the SNP are. They're like, they are the enemy within, right? And it seems so suspicious that what's going on right now with China and the spies and everything, and what you've been hearing about the schools and whatnot. Why does it not surprise me that this authoritarianism has come along at the same time? Plus the fact, isn't it rather quite suspicious that it all just came around like straight after Brexit? I mean, and then you hear all the talk about this whole, you know, what was it again? Something to do with the global reset or something like that. And you start
Great
hearing,
Reset.
yeah, the
Great
global
Reset.
reset, and it just all sorts, you know, sort of, you piece it all together, and none of it I can trust. I'm not saying that there wasn't you know, a virus or that, and I'm not going to diss people who got vaccinated, and I personally, through, you know, choice and that, I got the double vaccination, but what I do not stand for, what I do not believe in, is what you're seeing with all this force and the bullying of people just because they've not been vaccinated. You're starting to see them push forward things like, and I thought it was a joke at first, they brought forward the vaccine passports. That just, what it shows to you is the political class are not scared. I think they're testing you to see how far they can go. I think that's what it is. They're actually testing you to see how compliant you are. And they're literally, you know, it's like baby steps towards, like, you know, pro-authoritarianism.
Oh, of course, no question about it. That's why I said we're in a very slippery slope. I mean, if we chop away one of them and then chop away one of them and chop away one of them, and this is very dangerous. And also speaking about the PRC over the schools, yes, this is concerning. I mean, well, I mean, to be honest, if you want to do languages, that's fine. But the question is that their teaching content is very problematic. Just like the Confucius schools or Confucius Institute, I forgot how to say in English. Well, they're nothing but Confucianism. I mean, excuse me. Well, if we have time, we'll probably this stream or the next one, or we'll talk about lots of Chinese culture. I mean, how fundamentally the CCP is absolutely is that their ideology is not in line with the communism. Obviously, we have we have said that we have 9 schools of thoughts, or traditionally we categorize them after the spring and autumn period, and also the warlords period, because it's basically like the renaissance of the Chinese thinking, like we talk about 2,000 years ago, with different types of ideologies. some of them are considered as police states in modern time in socialism. We can talk about that in this one or the next few stream. But I absolutely agree that some is trying to sugarcoat these toxic CCP's materials or propagandas and trying to fit into people. That's why, interestingly, after the Confucius Institute has been closed down, the ROC, the Taiwan side, actually, they said they will open some of these new school, I forgot the name, to basically to teach languages. Obviously, to Mandarin, obviously, we haven't talked about the marginalization of Cantonese, which is my mother tongue. 大家好，我而家講廣東話. I just said that, hello, I was speaking Cantonese. That was my mother tongue. That was the official spoken language, supposed to be from Hong Kong, but they're trying to marginalize them. I mean, they're using the same policies that how the French marginalized local languages. Because after the Franco-Prussian War, because if you know the history, then we know that actually French is a Parisian language. It's a language of Paris.
Yeah.
There are many local languages, and they are using exactly the same policy how the French Third Republic do it in places like Canton. Obviously, Cantonese is supposed to be Canton. This is the Guangdong provinces. Guangxi provinces also speak Cantonese. Hong Kong, Macau, and to speak Cantonese. They try to marginalize them, and that's very concerning. And that is another way. And but the interesting thing is that they are trying to do the same thing on simplified Chinese, because they use simplified Chinese, and in my perspective, the only reason that they want to use simplified Chinese instead of traditional Chinese, just after the establishment of the PRC, they're trying to cut off the history.
Yeah.
Because once you cannot understand the words, then you can it's very difficult to understand history. Obviously, someone will going to argue that after the Qun dynasty, basically more than 2,000 years ago, there's a huge simplification of the letters, of characters of Chinese things. I will just point out that that's not a simplification. That is a more like a understanding from more circular path to become more rectangular path. This actually paves the way for real easy of understanding things. Okay, now we can. I'm not going to bore our audience about linguistic history of China. If some of the audience have interest in it, I'm more than happy to go deep dive in it. Just do let me know. But the thing is that some of the people do not understand, but they're trying to argue that this is the case is absolutely ridiculous. And I believing that you point out a very good point that this is basically the way that they're trying to cut power and they cut it bit by bit. And that is the thing. And obviously, we haven't even talked about that. Even they try to do so, classic government problem, they fail spectacularly. I'm sure that you have heard in many stories in Scotland that how the F fails spectacularly.
Yeah.
I mean,
obviously just got a comment there, and quite interesting. Because in relation, obviously with the agenda and the Chinese spies and that, and the whole thing where apparently they bought up schools and using it to push through their propaganda. Do you think it's a case that they're trying to brainwash the youth in this country to, obviously to get on board and favour their communist sort of, because they want to be that world superpower, but only, with communism. Of course, I mean, communism, if nothing can support it, it's destined for failure, and they're going to catastrophically fail. They don't understand that, but that's just the case. And quite interesting, there's a comment there by Thomas, and he mentions, are you familiar with Reddit, Scotty? And he says, there is one subreddit called Arsino, which posts Chinese propaganda, but weirdly Reddit is banned in China, so it can't be Chinese people creating these posts. The thing is, though, I mean, and I don't know specifically, but
just to
see people.
Sorry to interrupt. One point about bandit. Remember, they are banded by who? They're banded by ordinary people don't have the skills of technology to overcome it. The so-called Great Firewall. But if you have your own VPN and all these kind of things, you can do it. Not to mention, but if you're part of the propaganda team, you can get access to that without any restrictions. Back to you.
So in other words, this is what I was actually going to ask you in relation to what was just mentioned there.
Oh,
is there a lot of? Is
so
there a lot
jumping
of
on the
people,
right time, isn't it?
Yeah. is there a lot of people in China that have those? Because there always is. There's always those who, on the
Well, of course,
underground.
you have some people who are technically capable to do so. I mean, just to give you an idea, the Weibo basically is the Chinese version of Twitter. There's, I believe, in that one time that the inventor of the Great Firewall registered an official account on the Weibo. There are a huge amount of people complaining him that because of his Great Firewall, he cannot access to all these kind of things, and he have to delete his account. This was the best irony that I've ever seen. Isn't it the biggest irony that we have seen, isn't it? A massive black cash to the point they had to delete his account. Unbelievable. Very, very fake person. If I were him, I would not even bother to open an account because everybody knows that I'm responsible for this damn thing, But obviously, you have some people who have the technology capabilities to overcome it, the Great Firewall. Basically, if you have, based on my understanding, is that you can use it as a loophole to use a VPN, or you can use yourself as a own self-server to overcome it. Alternatively, as I've said, you have the propaganda team. Sometimes we call them the 5P or 5P or Mao. Mao means that the not it's the same pronunciation as a Chairman Mao, but Mao is sometimes can be in terms of pennies in the Mandarin, because these people have can receive 5P per post. That's why we call them the 5P gang. They will be used by or as a nickname or propaganda team over in the CCP, because they could be created by the CCP propaganda team to do these kind of things. And I'm not surprised at all. Obviously, we will have to. You can use server to try to track them down where they are. They could use proxy servers or VPN to once again hide their server it is and where exactly it is. This will make things more complicated.
Yep.
But I would not be surprised if these posts are generated by the so-called the 5P gang or the 5 Mao gang, or Wu Mao. Wu is Mandarin in 5. So that I guess I explained to myself quite clear.
Yeah, but there will be. I mean, it's always a case. See, when you've got totalitarian control, I mean, that's the reason why black markets had propped up in communist regimes and stuff like that. People will always try and find a way. The market will always try and find a way, no matter how much control they try to take. And it creates an underground where people just find other ways around it. So people that have got skills, people who can hack, people
absolutely.
that are really smart with computers and everything. Voight. I sorry if I mispronounced the name there. Voight K says, from 2 weeks to flatten the curve, and we have no plans to introduce a vaccine passport, to millions being spent on a permanent vaccine passport. Exactly. And then she says, and the public just happily go along with it all. It's just See, here's the interesting thing. Here's the interesting thing. This is exactly what they do, and this is just it, right? This is exactly what they do regarding socialism, right? They implement it in gradual stages, like in wee bits, and they feed you wee bits, right?
Yep.
So that you accept something, and in other words, if you were given communism straight away, you would never accept it. You would never accept the sudden loss of your freedom, right? You would never accept that. If, however, it was like the frog in the boiling pan, if you turned the temperature up right away to full, the frog would jump out.
Would jump up, no question.
If you put it in and just gradually turn up the temperature, the frog will stay in there, right? Yes. That is the same thing with the whole thing to do with socialism. Socialism's merely the gradual stage. It's gradualism. So what they do is they tend to pass one thing, and then they test the waters. They'll wait a bit. They'll wait a year or two down the line, and then they'll try the next thing. Well, this is the thing. These so-called social democrats were trying to push forward things like the Named Persons Act, and then if it wasn't the Named Persons Act, it was something like, I think we'll just introduce, banning people's freedom of speech. you can make it more extreme than that, right?
Sure.
and then eventually, I think it's a year down the line or so, they end up introducing the thing to do with, the vaccine passports. It's one thing after another. And folk think, folk have honestly got that attitude where they think to themselves, oh, it's just vaccine passports, the government's just, for our best interests, for the greater good of the greater number. People believe that. And
Sure, sure.
it goes down the road at one thing after the other. And before you know it, you know, the authoritarianism becomes normalised to the point that people no longer understand what freedom is. And people, the new generation who are born into, this type of world, think, oh well, this is just the done thing. And it's no. It's no. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to normalise this. What do you have to say on that, Mike?
Sure, sure. And well, in my perspective, what happened is that they have to. You have some of the case beautifully, but what I would add is that usually people under emergency, they will have a natural tendency to willing to give up freedom. I mean, because it is for the public sake, for the greater good. For example, during the World War One and World War Two, the government have been heavily taking the individual power away. We trust them, and thankfully the power did return. But obviously, after World War Two, the massive nationalization is another question, which is a sad thing because they have been, in my perspective, to get used to the government can achieve everything, which is not the case, because most of the people forgot that the reason that why the government apparently is so efficient, which is not the case, by the way, for example, during World War II, is because you only have one objective: win the war. Very simple, right? Of course, the Germans failed twice. Okay, let's face it. And what happened is that you have one objective, things are much more easier. But in peace times, we have different types of objectives with different types of people. We cannot anything that basically the transaction cost or information cost to understand all these objectives is way too high in a new institutional economics term. So that's the reason that why we cannot do it. Or in your favorite term, the economic calculation problem.
Oh,
So
absolutely.
yes, that's the because with too many objectives, So that is the thing. And obviously, this is back to the point of why is it apparently efficient. Ronald Coase, one of my heroes in economics, he's very similar to Thomas Sowell. But it's not as hardcore as Thomas Sowell as a Marxist. I mean, Ronald Coase actually used to be a socialist. What turned his mind? Obviously, through research, and the most important point, he was part of the civil service team during World War II. And he see that despite in a national emergency level, different departments do have power struggle between each other. So the so-called government is doing the best is absolutely, in his perspective, nonsense. That's changed him completely. Obviously, some of your audience will question why Ronald Coase have a government intervention nature, which I slightly disagree because in his perspective, Ronald Coase believing that one, the purpose of government is to define property rights, define and protect, basically. Two is to try to reduce the transaction cost. So this is the main two purposes of the government exist, which I believe is reasonable. For example, like today, when we go for like 3G license, 4G license, 5G license, we have a public auction, right? On who's going to get it. Actually, this is his idea, because he's the first one who argued that bandwidth should be auctioned off, just like a television station, whatever this is. It should not be based on the granting of based on what mission statement, whatever that this is, or based on whatever how close you are with officials. It should be based on how much money that the people is willing to pay for bandwidth. So he actually is one of these people. But this is the point that I will add up, and I guess I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So, I mean, it's quite interesting. We've covered quite a bit within an hour. So, obviously, what else would you want to cover with regards to, the situation with China and that? If there's anything you feel important in, in terms of any events or that, because obviously we know, the recent things that are going on. We've covered obviously about the pandemic and the sort of lockdowns and stuff like that. The situation in Taiwan, and even regards to certain rights and that. You can start to see that being taken in Hong Kong, unfortunately. What else would you like to add in?
Well, a few points. First of all, back to Hong Kong. I argue that the protests in Hong Kong are well intended. Absolutely no question about that. But they have been hijacked by different factions of the CCP and make Hong Kong become a battleground of everything. Now, what happened in my perspective, obviously, now it's just my interpretation of things. I'm not saying this is necessary to be true. Someone will even label me as a conspiracy theorist, uh, maker, or whatever that you want to call, but this is just my view. Now, in my perspective, someone is trying to use the situation, the chaos of Hong Kong, to try to dethrone Xi. Uses
Hmm.
a political leverage to do so. And what happened is that the people against Xi rally together to try to plan, control the oppositions, and to create chaos over in Hong Kong to make
Hmm.
sure that Xi will not be success. I mean, for example, um, if you find something very interesting that during the chaos of the protests, you see two places that the police never dare to get into. One is a Pacific Place, one is a city building. They are all both in the Admiralty area. Now, those who are not familiar with Hong Kong will have a clue what I'm talking about, but those who are, they will know what I'm talking about. Now, Pacific Place is owned by the British firm Swire Pacific, originally from Liverpool. They are British families, but you may say, "Oh, look, it's a British businesses. I mean, why they will be attacking them? I mean, this is probably they got into trouble." Now, another one is the city building is the named after the city Pacific. It is a PRC state-owned company. You
Yep.
may say, "Oh, it does seem make sense." I mean, however, if you take a look, who is the owner of the building? 60%, actually, city building is owned 60% owned by the company. I suddenly forget his English name. And you take a look at the Pacific Place. Actually, upstairs it is the Shangri-La Hotel. And for some reason, actually, these two people are the same. It's owned by let me double check his uh, uh, English name because he's a Malaysian Chinese. I have to so their pronunciation is slightly different than and the Cantonese pronunciation because they're influenced by the southern part. Sometimes it's Hokkien situation, and uh, uh, well, it's by he was regarded as Asian sugar king back then because he controlled the world's sugars and he's one of the biggest trader of world sugar, and which many people actually didn't notice that. He's a Malaysian Chinese. I'm trying to still checking his English name. Um, oh, Shangri-La. I forgot. Is Do you mind to say a few words? I'm sorry to say that. To take over, to let me check the name and to pronounce it accurately.
See, an interesting, obviously, comment I had that was obviously about how New Zealand is United Democrat Union basically said the banning of Australian subs from New Zealand waters is crazy, but the Jacinda Ardern is in a nutshell. She blamed capitalism for the recent problems in New Zealand, um, which brings me, it's quite interesting. But with regards to Hong Kong, I would imagine a lot of the people still there, um, that they are still strongly in favour of capitalism. They understand, um, obviously because of they wouldn't be protesting for nothing and stuff with regards to the takeover in China. The thing is, I mean, how do you see the situation turning out? Like, how do you see things going in Hong Kong? Do you think it's
Well,
eventually going to turn to just chaos, or you know, what do you think? Hong Kong will ever get its freedom back?
it will be a chaotic one, but I will answer the question after I give you the answer. His name is Robert Cook. I hope I pronounced the name correctly. Kuok, Robert Cook. We come to Asia Sugar King. Anyway, this guy, he's basically according to his own autobiography. I didn't put words into his mouth. He said that he has been in the past has intermediated peace talks between the Malaysian Communist Party, the Malaysian government, and also have the connection with the CCP. I mean, let's face it, if you do not command respect of all these people, you cannot, or connection with these people, you cannot have it. In my perspective, he is probably in more powerfully, you can say conspiracy in one sense, in the NDC movement. Don't quote me on that. This was my feeling. Interestingly, during the same pace when they're happening, some people might recall that there are military police in Shenzhen like to demonstrate, just like having a practice over there. And it seems like this is they said it is sending a warning shot to the people over in Hong Kong. But is that though? Now, we have to understand where these military police come from. It's come from the neighboring province of Fujian. I mean, surely it's easier to get someone in the Guangdong province, which is Hong Kong just right next to Hong Kong, right? Why you have to get all these people in the next province to come in? You know, it doesn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm.
But coincidentally, she was one time the Fujian province governor.
Mm-hmm.
Now, my connection is that this military police is coming to send a signal to those who is against Xi to say that don't mess it up too quickly. I know what now. What nerve are you doing? This is a signal I believe they're sending out. And this is going to be very complicated because the next thing that we will talk about is the 20th Congress coming in the next autumn. Because there is around a year left, the CCP, and they have to pick the next general secretary. We knew that Xi has already eliminated the limitation of the presidency on two-term limit.
Mm-hmm.
The limit was originally set by Xiaoping Tang. But yes, this is another pronunciation. But anyway, Xiaoping Tang. And because he wanted to break the so-called life-term commitments, because they do not want to have a politician have a lifetime power, a permanent leader. And that is the thing. And he hasn't officially break the rule yet. But if he does, he will break two rules right together. First of all, he will officially have the third term. That's why all these NDC people are trying to circulate around to stop him. Because once you break the rule, it's very difficult to reinstate, unless he's dead. Two, this will also break the rule set by the former president Zhe Mingjiang, the predecessors of Jin Taohu, okay? Because he set the famous rule, the 7 up, 8 down rule. What that means, if you're 76 or above, you can still be elected as senior political officials like prime minister, president, etc. But if you are 68 or above, you got to stand down. We not know Xi will be 68 or 69, something like that, in the next meeting of 20th Congress. So if he has to really get re-elected, he will break the rule for sure, okay? And the rule originally was invented by Zhe Mingjiang to stop his political rival to maintain power while he has retired. But the situation is that, I mean, you see Xi spend his huge political capital to try to eliminate the term limit, and he's going to break it. At least is his intention. But the question is that whether the NDC can stop him is very interesting because, for example, recently we have seen that there was a black swan happened in Tiananmen Square. I don't know whether you heard the story or not.
Yeah, this is going back to 1989 or so, and that
crackdown we will come into it later because what happened was that this is related to what she said before. She said that we have to prevent a black swan to happen in PRC, but you somehow get a black swan in a Tiananmen Square. This is a huge political challenge. It's a big middle finger towards Xi. I mean, you say something you do not want, but you have something come in, And not to mention about that the whole Tiananmen Square, a hell lot of CCTV, security guards, and it happened at the flag rising ceremony every day. I want to give the audience a context. In the Tiananmen Square, flag rising ceremony will take place at the sunrise, okay? So you got to get yourself ready very early. And not to mention about you have to have a huge amount of network of people to protect you because all this kind of intelligence, CCTV, police state will going to monitor you. How do you realize that this is coming in? So I said that this is a huge political fight coming in together. We were going to see a lot of political power struggle within the CCP and within the next year. I mean, until next autumn. Now, don't ask me who will win. I don't know. I'm just only an observer, I'm just only saying that what I've seen. Okay, but I will not call who is the winner. Okay, but I was saying that she's trying to get, as you said, she's trying to get to the mild route, lock the country, completely no political and economic freedom. The NDC, at least part of them, are following the traditional Xiaoping-Deng's approach. Politically no freedom, but economic freedom. And to be less aggressive towards foreigners.
That sounds very similar. You said is it the NDC?
The NDC? You mean?
I think what you said, something about the other one. I know she obviously wants to completely
NDC. Oh, NDC. Yes, NDC. That is about the NDC movement.
So they kind of want something that's very much akin to that of Singapore, with a strong free market.
Exactly. You are absolutely spot on. They try to adapt the Singapore approach. Sometimes we do not know authoritarian is like a parental consent. Is that the term? Like you have a big parent, like a big papa, to say that no, yes, no, yes. That is the approach. They are trying to adapt it because even in my perspective, Xiaoping-Deng is want to have this approach because before 1989 Tiananmen Square crackdown, you have a huge political spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
You have someone who absolutely is a hardcore Maoist. Perfectly understandable, it's a communist party. You will not, if you didn't find a Maoist, it's a surprise, you didn't find a Maoist in the communist party. You have someone like Xiaoping-Deng who's saying that a Singapore model. You have someone like Zhu Yangzhao who's saying that we should go even one step further. But the Tiananmen Square crackdown is a very, you can say, unfortunate case because this is also explained why the military, whoever controls the military, who has the real power. Because during the Tiananmen Square crackdown, technically, Xiaoping-Deng was no longer a member of the standing member of the political coup. So he, technically speaking, cannot vote on this matter. The problem is that back then, there are 5 standing members of political coup, okay? 2 of them pro-crackdown, 2 of them anti-crackdown. One of them, who is a reformist, abstained. That is become a hugely problematic. 2-2, right? Normally, you will have, because it's abstain in a Western democracy, we say, look, abstain, then no action will be taken, right?
Yep.
The problem is that this meeting took place in Xiaoping-Deng's home.
Right.
And he said that, no, I say we're going to do this. I mean, he's a military head.
It's quite interesting with the way things are going, and I never knew about this, but it just shows you that right now it seems like there's that kind of battle within where obviously one's trying to, bend Hong Kong towards more of the agenda that the Chinese Communist Party wants, which is full-blown communism, Maoism, basically. Whereas the likes of what you just explained there, they kind of want the more strong free market, but having the kind of authoritarian social aspects of their life, much like the Singaporean model, and I think that's quite fascinating. Obviously, I'm not a big fan of the social authoritarianism by like Singapore.
The Singapore model, yeah.
I'm not the big, but if I was forced to choose, then obviously what you would want to see is Hong Kong going down the road of the Singaporean model, at least to the extent of, maintaining the free market.
And back to the point, do I see Hong Kong going to anywhere? My view is that it depends on what its outcome is, because, excuse me, first of all, we need to know what is the outcome of 20th Congress of the CCP. If she is re-elected, you can expect the freedom will be even curtailed more. I mean, let's face it, she wants to curtail everything now. No, if she is basically, shall we say, follow the step foot of his predecessor to stand down.
Mhm.
It's a better way to say that this is a loser political fight, shall we say.
Yep.
And then it will depend on who is climbing up to the top job.
Mhm.
If it is someone like I know, of course, Jin Taohu and Zheng Mingjiang cannot be re-elected, and they would not be. And not to mention about Zheng Mingjiang is on his deathbed anyway. This type of people, a Singapore model is possible,
I think
in
that
my
would.
perspective. But it really depends on the political outcome. Obviously, also depends on the foreign relationship of the PRC. For example, will PRC really get the trust of the international community to saying that their so-called war roof policy, like aggressively expansion diplomatic approach, will they really abandon them? Do does the international community believe they're going to abandon them?
Yep.
And that's a huge question mark. And by the way, just to if we have time, we'll talk about also the Sino-Russian relationship. This is the
Ah, yeah.
most biggest misunderstood thing. I use the word Sino-Russian relationship, not Sino-Russian alliances. I deliberately use that word because I do not believe it is an alliance. Okay, this is one of the biggest BS that I've ever seen.
So
I've
you
seen
you think there's between Russia and China? Would you say then there's a conflict of interest rather than some sort of alliance?
a hell lot of conflict of interest. Now, I always remind our friends, first of all, we all know that one of the key problems of the Soviet Union when they jammed or economic meltdown in the 1980s because they stuck in Afghanistan. One of the major reasons, okay? Actually, PRC is one of those who helped them because they actually supply the guerrilla fighters the weapons. One, so that's a huge reason for the Russian to have a revenge. I mean, I'm sure that we all agree that Putin is not a stupid guy, and
Yeah.
he as a former head of FSB, the head of intelligence, he know that. I mean, he's waiting for the opportunity. But let's say don't talk about these things too close. Okay, let's talk about history. Russia has always had a strong incentive to conquer the Far East, even the Manchurian region. I mean, for example, we back to the 18th century, actually, when the Catherine the Great and back then they actually have war with Qing dynasty, but she lost. Okay, so the Qing dynasty of China actually expand to we call it this the Outer Manchuria region. But the problem is that during I believe in 1858, when the Qing dynasty started to be weak, so actually the Russia Tsar Empire actually they attacked the Qing dynasty, and they end up in the 1816 the Peking Convention, which many people didn't pay attention to that. Now, people pay attention to the British and the French part, okay, but they hardly pay attention to the Russian part, okay. The interesting thing is that during the 1816 Peking Convention, the biggest winner in terms of land is Russia. They've taken over more than 200,000 kilometers square of land from Qing dynasty. It is equivalent to around 1/6 of the land of the Qing dynasty back then. The Outer Manchuria. You may ask, look, this is just a bunch of places that do not have anything to have anyway. It's a remote area. You hardly have anything. Siberia. The good stuff. But there is a huge highlight point. I hope I didn't butcher the name. I'm sure that someone will be able to speak Russian fluently in this audience. The city of Vladivostok. I hope I didn't butcher the name. The base of Russian Pacific Fleet. Why this is important? This is the only place that Russia can place a Pacific Fleet in a harbor that will not get ice during winter. This is the strategic pride. Now you may ask, well, so what? They already get the thing they want, right? They should have a good relationship. Not really, because first of all, there is always a desire for Russia to even expand to take the inner Manchuria. That is, we call the Northeast Three provinces right now. It's a fact. I mean, for example, like the Russian-Japan war in the early 20th century. Actually, why they have this war? Because they try to fight that Manchurian region and the Korean interests.
This is
And
another thing, because interesting that you mention that, and obviously that conflict between Russia with that piece of land, obviously, and obviously a strategic bit of land. But it's the very fact that when it comes down to, and you see this throughout history, when it comes down to socialism, there's a difference between capitalism and countries forming an alliance in terms of free trade and stuff, because there's something they mutually agree with and there's a voluntary exchange. When it
Oh,
comes to
absolutely.
socialism and two collectivist movements, there's always that one that tries to root, and that's the problem with socialism. There can be only one ruler. So when it
Oh,
comes
absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
so when it comes to, you know, two next to one another, and you know, the interests of a specific piece of land, it's never going to work out. There's always going to be a conflict of interest, because obviously Russia will feel that's their own rather than, China, and China will feel the exact same way in that respect. They might do one another certain favors, and I would imagine, but I wouldn't say that from what you're explaining that it's quite the alliance of what's being made out, if correct.
Well, I agree because just back to the point. Because the beauty of free market is you have to persuade people to do it rather than using a force. Actually, this is a better thing. This is if I would argue the moral high ground is higher because you do not force people to do it. You persuade them. You use a civil manner to do it. That's a completely different story. And that I absolutely agree. Because some people argue that Russia is now a free market society. I mean, no, they do have some changes, but
Yeah,
they,
they're
they
not.
for example, Putin simplified the taxation system, other thing else. Okay, real. Okay, we will not deny that when this comes to. Okay, but the question is that overall, Russia is still a communist country or a very hard collectivist country. It's still highly independent state involved. I mean, let's face it. Why Putin will attend the World International Youth Communist meeting, okay, in Russia? I mean, if you're not part of it, you're not gonna associate yourself. I mean, come on. I mean, I'm this brainless that you want to dissociate yourself if you do not is not part of it.
Hmm.
That's why I said that it is quite clear that he's still a hardcore collectivist. We knew that. But it is in his interest. They're trying to expand over in China. For example, I get to into Manchuria, and also we get to the point that uh, we have seen some for bizarre thing. For example, like now you can go to search information yourself. Actually, Russia have a huge amount of missiles pointing towards the PRC. I mean, this is hardly friendly action. I mean, let's face it. We can all agree this is not a friendly nation, not a strong alliance as we'll have. One of you going to have a huge amount of missiles pointed out towards your neighboring country that is supposed to be very good and friendly. And not to mention about that, last year, remember Vladivostok, the place I've talked about.
Vladivostok.
Vladivostok, thank you. That's why I said I'm sure that there will be audience over here
Yeah,
can
someone
correct my Russian pronunciation.
someone
I, I,
mentioned it.
I do apologize if I butchered the pronunciation. That's why I said I'm sure that someone will going to correct me.
Yeah, someone did. John, it
Yes,
says Vladivostok, or is it Vladivostok or something, or
Vladivostok.
Vladivostok, something like that. There's always one.
Yes, and thank you. I do appreciate that because someone will correct me. And I do mean that because when I mentioned the base of the Russian Pacific Fleet, that people will know. Okay, this is a fact. Okay, and what happened is that they publish the Russia embassy in China on Weibo, that is a Chinese Twitter, publish a post to celebrate the Vladivostok is ceded towards Russia. You cannot make it up. Okay, can you believe in that the Russia embassy in China on the Chinese platform celebrating that the Chinese lose a strategic port to Russia?
Hmm.
This is a utter humiliation towards the PRC. Yes, you can expect a massive backlash to the usual stuff. So they tone down a bit, but they change the post and tone down a bit. But but they didn't completely gone. In my perspective, this is a huge signal to saying that Russia actually don't care about you.
Yeah.
You would not see the French to come in to say that we are going to
Yeah.
celebrate the William the Conqueror successfully defeating the British King Harold in the British in the Battle of Hastings in the 1066 that we the French successfully conquered England. You would not see things like that. Come on. Even though the British and the French doesn't have the best relationship, we can all agree that. I always joke that we are the untrustworthy alliances, but just a joke, okay? So don't blame me, the French friends, okay? Just a simple joke. But you will not see things like that, okay? That is the point. Even if you're going to take a look, that a few months ago, I believe Putin actually accepted a American network interview. Is this NBC or ABC? I forgot which network. But if you take a look at his interview, when he has been pressed about the Taiwan situation, he said that he would not answer hypothetical question. This is that it is a big sign for me, a big signal for me. If he is really committed to the Russia-Sino relationship, he would say that, well, we are good alliances. We will see. Well, if there is a need, we will help. But it's not. Well, we will help. But the PRC not necessarily need our help. The usual official stuff. You understand what I mean? But he just said no. We will answer hypothetical question. I believe this is a very big signal that he won't. And I may even dare to say that if PRC dare to launch a war, they might even stop it, or launch a ballistic missile. They might even try to shoot it down. And it's very simple because, in my perspective, what Russia's end game to PRC is that if they have been really another multi-divide, PRC will be divided by multiple countries, and then Russia trying to take their slice. In my perspective, this is what they're trying to do. And the irony is that most of the people in the PR system seems to smell the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, part of them is because of education. The PRC system, because the CCP is basically one of the kids of the original Russia Soviet the Communist Party. So they actually watered down, if not mentioning about the Russia, the history that between the Russia and China relationship. So that is the whole thing. And in my perspective, it would be very, very interesting to see the dynamics between Russia and the PRC. I don't see it go down well.
Yeah.
And this is also the myth that I'm going to have to bust, because we've seen the actions rather than words, and we can see that these actions is not matching the words. So you can see what Putin is saying is different from what he is taking actions. So we know what he is. Not know, but we have a rough idea of what he's thinking. So that is my point. The Russia-Sino relationship is not as good as most of the people think of.
Yeah, I can see what you mean, because there's obviously a lot of stuff that people just propagate and whatnot that they might not know, which is obviously always interesting to hear from yourself, and that's the important thing. I don't know if any of you guys have got any sort of, questions that you would like to throw in or that, you know what I mean? Anything that you guys would like to throw in, even from your own viewers, Mike, or whatever.
Well, perhaps while I am waiting for the question, I can say something else, because I have other questions that I
Indeed.
to answer. Because last time I recall that's because some of my friends asked me, what is the difference between neoclassical economics and classical economics? Because when I introduced myself last time, I said I'm a neoclassical economics who is a half Keynesian.
Yeah.
Well, the difference between neoclassical economics and classical economics is the concept of marginal. Classical economics don't have concept of marginal. Neoclassical economics have concept of marginal. Concept of marginal is invented in mid 19th century.
Mm-hmm.
Because before then, Adam Smith doesn't have a concept of marginal. That's why he struggled to explain the so-called water diamond paradox. He don't understand that. So his analysis has failed on that area. And the concept of marginal, and there's a common misunderstanding, the concept of marginal is the last one. No, the concept of marginal is the next one. why you stop buying this? Because your MU marginal use value in the next one is 0. That's why you stop buying it. If the last one is 0, then why we say this is you're going to buy it? We assume people are maximizing, right? If we assume people are maximizing, so the last one, if it is 0, then we shouldn't be buy it. So that's why the marginal concept is about the next one. Because of the next one, you have no use value, your marginal use value is 0, therefore you stop buying it. That is the case. And that's why I explained that why the concept of marginal is very important. And that is the thing. Now, and why I call myself a half Keynesian is because, very simple. I believe there is a clear idea that Keynes something was right. Now, I think I disagree with him, but I think that I agree with him. For example, the concept of full employment. That's very important. Most of the people doesn't understand that actually Keynes dispute the concept of full employment. Now, they do not dispute this concept could theoretically exist. But what I'm saying that in practice it doesn't exist. Now, for those who don't understand economics, what is full employment means? Full employment means no structural employment, no poverty, no one's been sacked, all the people are quit their jobs, and all those people who are not at work are intended to do nothing. That is what we call full employment. And
I
I think we
first
can
came
all
across
agree.
the argument, and it was something in like the 1950s or something like that. And there was a claim about the full employment in Britain. And when I looked, obviously, when I was reading through economics in one lesson, I know that Henry Hazlitt had actually addressed that in one of his chapters. His chapters are quite, in that book, are quite short, and I highly recommend anybody that reads the book. But from my own, personal perspective, I'm not obviously the biggest fan of it, like the Keynesianism and that. But it was mentioned about the full employment within that particular chapter that Henry Hazlitt had actually covered.
Well, I mean, the question is that I believing that we can never be achieving full employment. It's simple as that, in my perspective. And
Yeah.
I challenge anyone to presenting the evidence that full employment under the conditions that I've said is achievable. That's why I said I'm a half Keynesian, because I agree with John Keynes. First of all, Keynes should not be considered as only Keynesian model, and the general theory. Keynes has a huge legacy, and I will point out what are the things for those who do not understand or haven't had time to watch the previous stream, that I will point out what are things I agree or disagree with Keynes. Okay, the things that first of all I agree with Keynes is that full employment is not achievable. Very important thing. One, two. Actually, Keynes argue that there is a pioneer in arguing that interest rate should be observed based on the bond price. Not many people actually notice that. Before that, economics has argued that the interest rate are dependent on how many people are deposit and how many people are borrowing. And that is how they adjusted. The trouble that you may ask, that is how Keynes is so controversial because it destroyed two supply and demand immediately. Traditional economics is about the full employment concept. So one supply and demand gone, another supply and demand gone is about the bond price theory. Then you may ask why it gone? Because now bond is given in a certain period of time. It's a stock, right? If it is a stock, that means that it will be a vertical supply curve. If the
Yeah.
vertical supply curve is destroyed, the traditional concept of the supply demand curve. So that's why he's so controversial in that two area.
The
Obviously, yeah,
the
you go ahead
interesting
first.
thing is that, because for me, and obviously I'm strongly influenced by the Austrian school mostly. Although I do take on a lot of the arguments and what's covered in basic economics, even by Thomas Sowell. He would be regarded in the classical liberal sort of fields, similar way Milton Friedman. I don't know if you would classify him as Chicago school or whatever, but I'm more influenced by the Austrian school. And the interesting thing is that it's mostly on the monetary theory and stuff like that. And I had that interesting discussion earlier on because it was brought up to me, and
Yep.
I haven't personally read into great depth on monetary and banking. I've got a fundamental understanding, and I would obviously like to learn obviously a hell of a lot more with regards to the monetary history and stuff, and perhaps even cover on specific things like the Panic of 1819, because it was mentioned, and I remember watching a video, and it was Tom Woods, and he mentioned about the gold standard, and as he put it, that between 1700 to 1930 in Great Britain the gold standard was stable, and he said something about how gold did not need the expansion in quantity of money, and he obviously went in, he explained just a wee bit, he never went into really depth of that, and that's always left me intrigued. And he did leave sources of information below his video, and I'm pretty sure it's one of those sources, of course, was Rothbard's take on the Panic of 1819, and obviously from that perspective the gold standard tends to get a lot of the blame for what the trying and testing of the paper currencies, he would argue, had caused. But I know that when it comes to the Keynesian belief, they tend to be more monetarist.
Just to interrupt, Keynesian interpretation depends on which model you are approaching. Keynes in his life, he will argue about fiscal policy. So he argued about the government spending. So it is not necessarily monetary policy. Of course, you can next question, you can argue about that actually the boundary between physical and monetary is extremely weak these days. I mean, you could have spent a hell of a lot of money, and then who paid this? I mean, the central bank. So it is a monetary policy, marginal case. Because it's the thing that I get in. Well, first back to the point of gold standard. The problem of the gold standard, which I have, is that it could create inflation. When I say it could, because most of the people forgot that anything can be money as far as fulfill the free function of money as an exchange medium, as a unit, and you can store value. Now, you may say, how enough gold can create inflation? Oh, of course it does. A very good example is that when the Spanish, they managed to get a hell of a lot of gold from the North America, they have a high inflation coming in Spain. It's well documented in the monetary history. What happened is that because whatever the money suddenly come in, when you are now traditional QTM would say the quantity of money, for those who say quantity of money as a QTM, I call them abbreviations. QTM will notice that when we add full employment, which I dispute previously, I say that it should be approaching the full employment, then the level of price is directly related to the money that you have. So what happened is that because when Spain is approaching the full employment, and you got a hell shit, pardon my language, but you got a hell load of gold come from North America, dump it into this Spain, price level go up. That is the reason that I always remind our friends that who believe in gold standard that gold could inflate, and it has before. So instead, what we should be arguing is a fixed approach of the monetary system that we have. That's why I'm supportive of the Chicago plan. And yes, by the way, Friedman is a Chicago economicist. I could argue myself the fifth generation of Chicago economics, but I dispute. I will quickly finish my point.
Something I'm interested in, and I don't know if you would support it, because you say about the Chicago school leaving, but the thing that I'd be interested, what then would you make of, because I don't particularly know the ins and outs and everything. I know it's decentralised a lot, and I know that there's two sides to the argument. That's kind of why I want to look more into the monetary history and everything like that, because there's obviously mixed arguments. But what would you make of the Bitcoin? Because some people say it's a bubble, other people say otherwise, and it's quite an interesting thing because it was brought up earlier on. And ideally, if there was such a system that you had decentralized, that, let's just say for argument's sake, from a hypothetical perspective, that it couldn't be manipulated in the same sense that, to a varying extent, was decentralized from governments. now, of course, I understand nothing's perfect. I don't know the ins and outs of it, but
But as
what
I
would you
said, for
make
the
on
sake
that?
of argument, let's assume it is possible. And what is my view of it? Well, first of all, I consider anything from gold or from the fiat currencies to whatever that is as an asset. It's very important because we have to understand that these things can be trade relatively. And do I believe it is a bubble? First of all, a bunch of disclaimer. I'm not a financial expert. I'm not a financial analyst. I'm not going to do financial advice. You got to do your own research. A bunch of disclaimers, usual stuff. But for me, I wouldn't say that this is a bubble, but I would say the current price is very high. I just don't know when it will come up and down. You know that the Bitcoin could be have a roller coaster within a day. If you have a weak heart, you probably do not want to trade that. Shall we say it this way? So it is not something that is for me now. But let me in a more generalized perspective. What is the view of the cryptocurrency as a whole? Now, that is a very interesting topic. Now, I know that someone trying to argue with me that the PR is trying to run the cryptocurrency. True. But they trying to centralize the thing. The whole blockchain and the ledger will be centralized. That is a very bad idea. So that's why I will remind our audience that so far, until the day that is recording this video, I do not know what is happening in the future, this is a bad thing. The state-run PRC cryptocurrency is a terrible, terrible thing. Okay, it's absolutely not the cryptocurrency that we are seeing right now. So that is the point.
Yeah, I mean the whole, it's because I had that discussion earlier on. I wasn't aware of the fact that they wanted their own, cryptocurrency and centralising. I mean it's illogical anyway, because the whole foundation, the whole where the demand came from for cryptocurrency was essentially to pull away from government in the first place. That's kind of the whole thing, to pull away from this whole fiat monetary system. I think, well, that's kind of where the invention of the whole Bitcoin currency, the cryptocurrency thing, stemmed from, as a decentralized, blockchain type of model. It's very much kind of similar to the way blockchain works with social media, everything decentralized. And that's in that from that perspective, from the theoretical perspective, I do like that kind of idea. Again, I don't know what to trust in that respect. A question that was asked, obviously, by John, he says, has the failure that's about to happen in the Chinese housing market been covered yet? I mean,
Oh,
what
you
would
mean
you
the
make?
Evergrande, I suppose. Evergrande. I forgot the name.
So this is the thing. I mean,
I guess what he is saying. This is about the Evergrande situation. I probably yes, Evergrande. Yes, I suppose this is talking about. Well, for me, the housing market in the PRC is a very weird thing. Now obviously we go back to asset part now. We talk about asset rather we talk about finance rather than economics these days. First of all, we have to understand that where is the demand come from? I do not see that. To be quite honest, because the especially after Xi get taken to power, he clearly cracked down on the property market. Let's face it, the whole thing is that it is within expectation that Evergrande will be in trouble. It is back then a few years earlier. It already like that. Not many people actually noticed that. It just happened that it is now very big that people start realize that. I would argue this is also one of the political bombs that his opponent, the anti-Xi movement, trying to throw into Xi. Because this is a huge thing. If you're going to bail this out, you're going to use the government money. If you're not, people are going to point it out to you because Xi has established himself as a Superman in the country. So what are you going to do? I believe this is a trap. And obviously, this will also create some. I expect they will probably be nationalized, but all the debt owned by foreign investors will be default. This is my expectation. But we will
yeah,
wait and see.
defaulting on the debt, basically.
On foreigners, to be specific,
Mm.
because they want to create a storm in the foreign stock market. In my perspective, this is what they're targeting. And that is the way that I expect they will do that.
Yeah, I mean, I remember years ago I even looked at it, and China was just building houses for the sake of it, and they were just empty houses. It's just like it was just like building, countless numbers of them, and it's obviously going to create a problem in the market. Um, but yeah, I mean, obviously, what's happening recent, I've not been paying too much attention with the housing market and any sort of crisis, but it's part and parcel with regards to China. But I remember obviously you mentioned about how they're a ticking time bomb and that. I mean, like I said,
Yes.
I mean their economy, even if they're just going to push for more socialism. They're just going to push themselves right into a bigger crisis. Thomas had obviously asked me about how would you decide the gold pound rate, Scotty, as he's talking about if you overvalue or undervalue, you get problems. Well, this is the thing. I mean, everybody's going to have different views on that. And I haven't read extensively, pure into depth about the whole thing to do with gold and silver, but the issues of what you saw in the 19th century was never ever the fault of gold and silver. Never the fault. You would have to follow the monetary history to comprehend what basically caused. For example, if you read Murray Rothbard's book on the Panic of 1819, even from the get go, you'll find that because they could not get New England, because I think New England at the time, and this was mentioned by Tom DiLorenzo in his book The Real Lincoln, because that's one I'm currently reading,
Yep. Yep.
and it was mentioned how New England wanted to secede, right? Because they were against the kind of view, and they were against the embargoes. I think it was imposed, by Jefferson, and they weren't pleased. I think that they tried to secede 3 times, New England, and during during one of the attempts to secede, um, they did reject financing the war for what was ahead, the War of 1812. Right, they rejected that, so they refused. You could think of New England at that time kind of like what New York Wall Street is today. So things had moved from. I'm pretty sure it was. I think it moved from New England to New York, in terms of what would become Wall Street and stuff. And the government heavily relied upon New England in order to try and finance the war. So because they couldn't get New England to finance it, they basically got other states to then create run the printing press basically, and it ended up, if I remember right, I think they imposed certain, I don't know if it was tariffs or that, but they redirected trade that ended up harming the likes of New England, etc. They harmed the country in general, and then ran the printing press. It caused an inflationary problem. All
Well,
in
I
the
mean,
name of
that's the problem, and that's why I said it's very important that in the Chicago plan, people will have the right to vote on how many they're going to expand and contract their money supply.
I
And if
can
it is the people,
see
if the
that.
people have to, now I'm not suggesting there's no risk. I knew that because
Yeah.
there is a majority of people that if they're not educated enough, then we're damned.
Uh-huh.
But that is the least worst option, at least better than the central bank, in my perspective.
So yeah, I know what you mean. In terms of the central bank, I've always got a problem with obviously with that policy, simply because of the fact that
Oh,
there's always the threat that they kind of go on their own, and they're even spending during periods when the economy is doing better, and that has
I
probably
I
been.
mean, we don't have to talk about too many complicated things. The purpose of the central bank is do things, right? Is mainly the last bank of resort and control the inflation, basically become a stable economy, right? If the central bank capable to do it, then no banks will have ever collapsed, and we will always have a stable economy, which is not the case. I mean, we have great recession ups and downs. The best example to prove how they failed the job. Simple. Of course, we can have even go more deeper theoretical calculations on why they fail and how they fail. The problem is that we have a huge system that is embedded in the central bank that we can't. So what we reach to a point that we would say that if there is a central bank, what we have to do. Obviously, I do not want to be reduced into this way. This is what Milton Friedman basically is, sadly, because he basically argued that because we are reached the point that we cannot get rid of the central bank, so we have to advise what the central bank should have done. And obviously, that's also explaining a lot of things. For example, like we talk about inflation, you probably have the printing press, right? You may ask why this generation, the current generation of, or at least the last 2 decades generation of the central bankers, they run the printing press that great, because they are being educated in a way that they are anything but deflation. Basically, they will avoid deflation at all costs. If you take a look at every single one of them, take a look right at what their thesis they write, what they are educated, what they're doing, what they're thinking. So the problem is that they are all being harmed by the Great Recession because the central bank didn't able to give enough money supply to the rest of the banks. That's why they say, okay, when we have a recession, 1, 2, 3, dump the money. That's why the term helicopter money, And obviously, there is some people asked, why there is no inflation then? That is the problem. And I don't see the problem because most of the people doesn't understand one thing, which I'm going to explain here. In the past, we say the central bank has the relative capability to expand the money supply towards the main street. When I say relative, because you have classic liquidity trap issues, so you cannot necessarily get it through the bank from the bank. The bank can choose not to loan it out, right? And you still have the absolute control of contractual money supply. The problem is that during the early 2000s, we proved that this is not the case. Now the central bank actually only have a relative control of money supply, the contractual money supply. You may ask, well, it's easy. You just have to raise the interest rate, right? You would have thought that. Not until 2000. Now, what happened is that we all remember the 2007, the subprime mortgage crisis, right? Now, we knew the subprime mortgage crisis, or the subprime mortgage had to be packaged or securitized by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. These two are government-sponsored companies, basically offering a subprime mortgage, basically promising the banks will buy these subprime mortgage loans off from their books. So basically, when the banks offer the subprime mortgage loan, and then they go to sell to the Freddie Mac, and Freddie Mac will sell back to the investment bankers, and the investment bankers sell to a bunch of other people. That's how the whole chain works. Okay. Now that's the problem, because when the Fed raised the rate, right? We all knew the subprime mortgage is quite risky, and the interest rate to reflect on that. Okay. So when you raise the interest rate that is high enough that actually the people are not afford to pay them, what they will do, they will be foreclosed. Foreclosure. I mean, we can all agree that. So when you foreclose, when you're being under foreclosure, then all these securities, subprime mortgage securities, will get into problem. Who will pay them? Mm-hmm. No one paid them. Then you become a domino effect to drop down. But you may ask, what is this related to money supply then? Now, here is the catch. When this product is sold, a huge amount of them actually exported outside America. Because that means that no one will have a clue what these properties are, And the funny thing is that this export, when they go out, most of them are to foreign investors. And when they go out, they get dollars back, right? So actually, the banks has increased their cash on hand. And this part of cash or money supply actually is not coming from the Fed.
So in your argument, out of interest,
so in other words, the Fed do not have the control of this part. You see what I mean? Unless you outlaw that completely, okay? Obviously, there's another case, okay? So as a result, actually, the rate of interest rate is not really as powerful impact that day, because as far as the mortgage-backed securities loop can go ahead, the banks can create money themselves. Of course, we know money creation is possible. Okay, I'm not trying to. It is not impossible. Money multiplying effect, all this kind of like usual stuff. You understand where I come from? What I'm saying is that they can sell this thing through export and to get the money back without asking the Fed to give them. That's the point I want to highlight. In other words, the interest rate when they're raising is not as effective at trying to control it. And that's what will explain why that, all this inflation here now, we still don't have it. We printed a shitload of money, okay, from 2008 until now, okay. Why the inflation just only come in right now, not before? Yes, we have some climb up, okay. I realize that, okay, I'm not pretending I didn't know. What I'm saying is that one, we forgot that how many of these subprime mortgage MBS are worth. We're talking about at least 300 to 400 billion worth of things. We haven't accounted derivatives yet. For example, like the CDS credit, CDS, it's kind of insurance products. And these insurance products, when you just kind of insurance to this MBS, okay, subprime mortgage-backed securities, and then the relevant market, and also when you're trying to have this as an asset, like an insurance, you can mortgage it or get it as a collateral to get the money out. You can sell or you get it out. So you are even as a way to expand your options in creating the money without even asking the Fed to give you extra penny out or as a dollar out from the Fed. You understand where I come from now? That's why and the problem is that after the 2008, subprime mortgage is outlawed, and because of the subprime mortgage crisis, people are very skeptical about the mortgage-backed securities market as a whole. So the market shrinks significantly. The market strength, right? But the strength is basically is not offsetted by the money that we've printed so far. Remember that when the market first was strained, so you have to something to fill the vacuum first. Secondly, because of this value of these subprime mortgages securities drop, then you have the money will be destroyed, right? We not know that money destroyed, that you have to retract back this money, right? And you have to fill all this part of vacuum too. That's why our inflation is not as high as we expected, because you're still trying to fill the gap. You understand what I mean? So now, I'm not suggesting that I'm not saying that we should let 1, 2, 3 print the money. No. This is absolutely not. And it is most of the government in the world right now, especially after COVID cases, have a very, very dangerous level of debt to public spending. Or the public debt to GDP ratio is extremely dangerous. I'm not suggesting we should 1, 2, 3 try to press a button to print it. What I'm saying is that the reason that why we're not seeing, because we have so many extra money resources that we haven't seen before the 2007 financial crisis that we does not realize. And by the way, the estimation that I've given you is a very conservative estimation, because the real estimation we will never know, because they are only keeping the investment banks data. You understand, Malcolm? I mean, no one give them us. We just have a rough idea, have a rough calculation of what this is. Now, the second point is that why we see inflation kicking now is because it's another classic example of QTM. When we are approaching to full employment, then we will have the price level and will be directly related to the money that we print, right? The problem is that the caveat is that we need to approach to full employment, and the restrictions on the pandemic is somehow in one of the most precise way to help us to approach to full employment. You have all the simultaneous checks, furlough scheme, all the regulations, and really all this kind of stuff. They are buying people to go out. They're forced to stuck in the place, and they have all this money coming in. You see, that's the problem that we're having. That's why it kicked in. Now, if QTM is right, after the furlough scheme is retracted, after the stimulus check has come back, we should have at least see a small drop of inflation for a certain period of time. Now, we will soon know, because in the UK, we just literally, end the furlough scheme. So we will wait and see, well, whether QTM is right or not. We will soon know that. So this is my perspective, because it's a very complicated story. That's why I spent all this time to explain that.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, it's one of these things. Obviously, people have all got a different view regarding money and stuff like that. I mean, my own personal perspective, as you know, I'm more of the Austrian theory, and like at the end of the day, I mean, I could ask you what you would think in regards to, you know, getting rid of the central bank. Would that be something you would support?
Oh, of course I do. I make myself very clear about that.
Yeah,
I absolutely believe that we should get rid of central bank.
and that's
I
the
mean,
key because, I mean, at the end of the day, it's the central banks that have largely been responsible, and from the Austrian theory, as you know, with the Austrian business cycle, it's explaining about how it was that influence from, you know, the likes of the Federal Reserve, for example, that was controlling and manipulating the interest rates. These type of things I would strongly be against because I'm obviously in favour of the free market. Just leave the interest rates be, leave it down to the laws of supply and demand. That's what I strongly stand by, and I've explained the reason for that. I think Tom Woods actually gives an excellent explanation with Michael Malice, and he explains it in relation to the Great Depression. And this is the issue because the central banks have been, you know, creating this very problem through the manipulation of interest rates. It was the same thing with manipulating the ratio of money. They were manipulating the ratio, and because of that, they were able to, you know, lend out those large mortgage loans, etc. None of that would have happened within that of the capitalist system. The capitalist system regulates itself to the point that they would only lend to people they can trust that are able to pay them back. They just would not lend to the type of people who wouldn't be able to pay them back. So that whole thing was created, you know, that boom and bust cycle of the 20th century especially was created because of the central banks. And I think that was actually the interesting discussion that I had earlier on with regards to the whole thing on, you know, Bitcoin or whatever. Although I don't know the ins and outs of it, but the argument was Bitcoin could potentially be the way to pull demand away from central banking to, you know, a way to get rid of central banking. I don't specifically know. I couldn't really tell you whether Bitcoin will work or not. I don't, you know, I don't know the ins and outs personally, you know. However, I think for me, having, you know, regardless of what people argue, for me is what is most important is to have free market money, to leave the ratio of money be, to leave interest rates be, and leave it down to the free market to determine what your money is in that regard. That's how I view things, and I do believe in free market banking. So not like this kind of, you know, central banking system you see today, where it's controlling and manipulating, and it has such power and control, where it's got central control over the monetary supply. And I believe that is a big part and parcel of the problem, and because governments are heavily involved, it's created that
oh,
large
sure, no,
scale
no question
borrowing and
about it.
spending, and that's escalated a large part of the inflation. Now you mentioned obviously with regards to, you know, relative to after the 2008 financial crisis. Obviously, there's there's a difference between official figures of the inflation and the real inflation. The
Oh,
truth,
I agree with you. Yeah.
the truth is their quantitative easing, like QE1, QE2, and
I call
QE3.
it QEN.
Mm,
I call it QEN, and
yeah,
whatever the number positive integer that you wish to put in.
yeah. I mean, it it failed. Iceland for me did the right thing. Iceland just let the banks fail, and they put the they put the bankers in jail. that's that's what we
I
should have
believe we
done.
do bail them. I believe we bail Iceland. Some banks. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm pretty much sure that some of the member of the audience probably will point it out. But you go ahead first.
I can't specifically remember, but you know, it was one of the things that they were leaving banks to liquidate, and that for me is how you know, the system should be capitalism, leave failure to liquidate, leave incompetence to liquidate, don't protect them. And that's something I'm strongly against. I don't know why anybody would say they support capitalism, but then on the other hand would say they support, subsidising. That's essentially, it was the subsidies that essentially created this protectionist, or part of the reason it created this protectionist system that you see today, that's resulted in incompetence. I'm personally against, all the sort of, subsidies involved in that respect. I think that for me personally is why I support limiting government as much as possible. And even some people I can respect who, believe in anarchism. That's another story. But obviously, just those slight differences. At the current moment, I do support, the gold and silver standard. But even then, I do believe that it's down to the market. It's down to whatever people in society decide is going to be our money. And who am I to say that Bitcoin, for whatever reason, doesn't take off? I mean, if there ends up the demand, and if it does end up being successful, then so be it. Great, I think it's whatever the market really just determines. But yeah, I mean, it's quite interesting. But I do agree with you in the extent of getting rid of the central bank. I mean, that for me is, I think, the most important point.
Sure, no question
in my
about that.
perspective. I've just seen if there was any other questions on that. Ben says political class get richer and communism the billionaire. Well, that's always the case with regards to whether it's corporatism or just socialism in general. Government increasing red tape on banks, higher fees for consumers. Well, that's that. See, this is the thing. I mean, the claim. It was even the claim about how the banks were apparently unregulated going into 2008, which was one of the biggest myths that was ever told. As Thomas asks, Scotty, what do you think should be the main way governments control inflation? Governments control inflation. Well, I would never rely upon government to do so. Not unless for whatever reason being that you let in someone or some type of government for whatever miraculous reason. It would have to be the type of government that believes in the free market, that I mean literally believes in it. Not these type of politicians we get constantly every 4 bloody years where they say they support the free market and they really do not.
No, they don't. I remember that you see a video about Theresa May saying that we're living in a free market or free market capitalism, I think.
Exactly. And it was the same story with, what was it, Boris Johnson. He's going on about free market this and free market that. And as soon as he's let into government, it's just, it's sadly, okay, he's stymied with the free trade, and I respect the ground he's made in that regard. But sadly, this is what happens every time, every 4 years. They speak the rhetoric of the free market, and it's no wonder people fall into the trap of thinking that we somehow live under a free market. We don't. It's because they keep on using that rhetoric, and we really don't. But yeah, I mean, with regards to that, I wouldn't trust governments in that respect. Unless for whatever reason being you ended up with a style of government like that of Singapore.
Well, no, I mean, to be quite honest, Singapore is still a very difficult place. I mean, yes, these days they are not as authoritarian as Lee Kuan Yew. I mean, or the founding prime minister of Singapore. I mean, but rule of law in politics is still very questionable. And I do use it rightly. I mean, when the government can back them under Lee Kuan Yew time, can always win court case, no question asked. Now, that is a questionable thing. Now, of course, government can prep their case very well, but really, 0 losing rate? Honestly, that is a big question mark. And you see how they use the court system to help them in one sense. Not to mention about them gerrymandering the constituencies in Singapore. So I can, well, obviously the PAP, the People's Action Party, the ruling party of Singapore, is the overall um, vote share is dropping. It's true, but I believe this type of parental management is also a problem. I In terms of long-term survival of Singapore, my question is that what if suddenly this elites is not as marked as in the past? That could damn the whole country, isn't it? We're having a theoretical exploration over here. That doesn't mean I agree with this kind of approach. But the thing is that Singapore is sometimes the people, if they do not understand that, is that yes, you can always say, oh, our politics will trust the government or whatever that it is. The question is, what if the government get it wrong? And it could be. I'm not saying that they are doing wrong at the moment. I'm not saying that it is, but it could be. For example, Singapore currently is in a marginal fine line between the PRC and the Western alliances, whatever you want to call them, or NATO, whatever that it is. But how exactly it's done? Obviously, you could argue that, look, they have a strong naval base presence over in the Changi. I mean, I have reliable diplomatic sources told me that the Changi base actually even have automatic ammunition installation facilities, something that is so advanced that even the American within America they didn't have one now. But I haven't seen that. My diplomatic source told me that it's the case. But that is the thing. I mean, in my perspective, Singapore is in a very dangerous position, and they will have to take a side. You cannot just simply pretend this will not happen. Obviously, we get back to the politics side now, and obviously the whole East Asia dynamic is very, very strange. And well, perhaps we'll talk about it in the next stream, because how, for example, how we're going to view these things. I mean, for example, like how the complexity of the race and how this kind of stuff. We just opened up the different factions of CCP yet. We talk about NDC movement. We haven't talked about the different factions of the CCP. You have the Xi and the NDC. Yes, the big theme at the moment. But different factions are working against NDC for this. We're going to probably dive into it even more deeper.
Definitely. I mean, this is the thing. I mean, it's we've covered quite a fair bit, I feel, and obviously for whenever do the next stream, I'll get organised, a number of stuff, questions, and obviously topics. We'll definitely arrange Mike on the stuff that we'll obviously speak about, and section it. But yeah, I mean, there's obviously a lot of other things. But yeah, I mean, in overall, I mean, it's one of these things that in this, I do understand things are a lot more complex over there. I do understand what you're talking about. You can't fully trust governments, and that's part of the problem with Singapore. You can't fully trust what the government do. Therefore, okay, it's free market now, but how long would that even last for? All it takes is letting in the wrong type of politician, and then before you know it, they start making changes to their economy, and you get where I'm coming from.
Oh, of course, no question about it. That's why I said we can never rely on a few individuals to say that, oh, yes, good. But no, you can't. That's exactly the problem, and that is
correct.
Exactly. And it's very rare that we see a Swiss entity that can go so well like that. They go for a universal basic income. They overwhelmingly reject that. I mean, it's very rare. I mean, Swiss is a very, very rare case in my perspective. But that democracy works because, in my perspective, we should be running a constitution country. Now, because it's a United Kingdom, so I would say that we should be running a constitution monarchy or constitution check and balance within the country. In America, it should be a constitutional republic, but not a democracy. It's very important.
Yeah. I mean, America needs to turn back to, in my opinion, America needs to turn back to its foundations before Abraham Lincoln, before the great centralizer. In other words,
I understand because
you know,
Lincoln. I
back.
always argue that the slave and Lincoln, the liberation of slave is a byproduct, as I always argue.
Yeah, it was
Not
a
to
myth.
mention
It was a
about.
myth, by the way. I mean, see if you read Tom DiLorenzo's book, The Real Lincoln, you'll get your eyes open. I mean, the
Oh
guy.
yeah, yes, I should have read it before, and that's why I said that it's a byproduct.
Yeah,
And even I always remind my friends, Lincoln within the Republican Party is not the strongest abolitionist or
yeah,
hardcoreist.
he never
In the
was. 30 years,
He's not.
30 years. He was a what was he? He was a lawyer or a legislator or something, right? 30 years, and he was never, ever, ever the biggest advocate of getting rid of slavery. In fact, he strongly favoured Henry Clay's, proposal to take them all and actually, deport them all, get rid of them all.
Yeah, so
It's
for
like,
basically what the Libya model, basically get them all back to Libya.
yeah,
You know,
yeah.
yes, that is the Libya model. I know.
But
That's why I said that. Yeah, you go ahead first.
the key thing of why I say before Lincoln is because Lincoln's policy and what he fought, what his main concern was not about saving the Union, and it was not about slavery. It was about the American economy. The American economy was favoured by the likes of your Alexander Hamiltonians, your Hamiltonian, your Henry Clay, your just what Lincoln took on, the Whigs,
Yeah,
in
yeah.
other words, and those who were
The American
strongly in
Whigs, yes.
favour of the heavy protectionist tariffs, the subsidising special interest groups, the corporate interests.
He
Um,
was elected on that manifesto, by the way, because that is one of the very big reasons why the South wanted secession, because he wanted to put a lot of import tariffs that were going to dam their export, because they need to import raw materials before they can export stuff out. Basically, this is one of the key reasons, because you put this tax or tariffs, whatever you call them, on this import and materials. Where the hell going to do it? Obviously, slavery is just a byproduct, as I always said. And I would even argue, if Lincoln is not being assassinated, um, the slavery movement probably even go slower, because he's someone who is willing to compromise, in
the
one sense.
yeah, the key thing. I'll just quickly look through any of the comments. Uh, Watching government all the time, Tories and clowns. At least, yeah. I mean, all of the governments are. So yeah, I mean, the key thing out of America returning back to its foundations was that prior to Abraham Lincoln, today's America would have been far different, because it was very constitutionalist. The only reason why the United States of America changed, and I have to be harsh in saying this, is because Abraham Lincoln was a dictator. That's it. He was anti-constitution. And I don't understand for the life of me how anybody who can come out and say otherwise after what I've read about him. How anybody can claim that Abraham Lincoln was constitutionalist is just beyond belief. This was a man who basically disbanded temporarily or for a suspended period of time habeas corpus, and had so many, even people who were on his side but just slightly disagreed with him. Like, he even had so many in the media like arrested and sent off. Like, he
Sure,
imprisoned them
sure.
for years. I mean, he was literally a flat out anti constitutionalist in the original sense of individual states and the individual states' rights, even to the extent Alexander Hamilton didn't believe in using force. Even although Alexander Hamilton agreed with his, great centralisation of, how government would become afterwards. But even Hamilton agreed that nothing should be ever done through force. And the entire thing of what Lincoln did was essentially just that. and it's because of his influence, and it was a very negative influence, that is the very reason why that every president after that, near enough, has gone down the road of trampling all over the constitution, the constitutional rights,
Or you cannot
government
understand.
since then just grown in size and
Uh, Basically, they are pushing the envelope of the whole American Constitution in a better framed phrase, a more diplomatic way. And obviously, we see the Supreme Court buckle when it's on the case of the minimum wage. When basically, correct me if I'm wrong, but Roosevelt Jr., FDR, promised to cut packing, so they buckle. It is a huge shame. I mean,
yeah.
I mean, the irony is that FDR was elected on the manifesto of a free market approach, small government, and when he got into power, okay, everything got to change. That's exactly the problem.
Yeah, and that's precisely it. Likewise, I mean, it's just the way things are here, even here in Britain. But yeah, I mean, obviously, free markets the way forward, and obviously, I'd like to discuss a lot more when it comes to it. No doubt, because I'll obviously get arranged, questions lined out and everything,
Sure.
and we'll
Sure,
obviously get around to discussing.
and some debates probably because the point that I talk about, I'm not just as a brief thing. Austria's school, I disagree of something that about they're based on something that we can observe, utility and all this kind of stuff. Chicago school, my microeconomics is heavily influenced by that. Well, I could call myself fifth generation Chicago school economist if I want to. My mentor in economics PhD supervisor, Stephen N. S. Jung, is a student of George Steiner and a close associate of Milton Friedman. But I do not like to be called Chicago economics because I disagree. Milton Friedman influenced me a lot on micro, and especially his methodology. His macro, oh no. We're going to talk about it next time because I realize we've streamed on it almost 2.5 hours. I'm not very sure my audience have the patience to keep listening for us for that
Of
long.
course. Of course.
And his macro is very, very upsetting. Milton Friedman's macro is very upsetting. Obviously, I pick up his Chicago plan, but some of the things are very upsetting. That's why I call myself, I lie myself a neoclassical economics because this is my best description. I support the free market, and that is the thing. Or sometimes I'll call myself new institutional economics because I love to using transaction costs. This is a hot topic, and that's the case. This will spark a lot of debate. Especially with someone who understands Ronald Coase, then I am pretty much sure that someone we're going to argue about that. Especially someone from Austrian school, whether Ronald Coase, because Coase will argue that the government exists because of the define and protect the property rights and the reduction of transaction cost. They will argue that this is nonsense, but I will argue otherwise. But I look forward to your topics and questions, shall we say?
Yep, that's basically it, man. It's been obviously really interesting. And no doubt, I'll hopefully fit in if people have got questions at some point, in the next feed and everything. I have got, stuff downloaded and that because I had been requested to do the video on late stage capitalism, so I'm doing that first. And obviously I'll lead it through that and get around to recording that at some point. But that will require a lot of editing and whatnot, but I'll need to go through obviously all that type of video. It's because the videos are quite lengthy and that, and I need to go through and take out whatever I need, so it'll take me a wee bit to do. But anyway, it's been really interesting in that, and like I say, obviously the next we'll cover stuff that perhaps I haven't been able to cover and whatever. We'll definitely arrange for that. Maybe even get a an offline live stream just to get stuff organised, and then once we
Sure, sure,
get things organised, we'll obviously get around to doing the live stream. You know.
sure,
So
sure.
anyway, folk. I mean, I don't know if you get any last questions or that, but no, I don't. I don't think. Either way, folk, it's been good, and like I say, I mean, it's quite sad the way things have gone in Hong Kong, especially, and you've seen a lot of the people come here. I'm very glad to see that Britain managed to get so many of the people here, and they would have been glad to. Well, as sad as it is to say, escape that because of what happened.
Just one point. In the next stream, remind me to talk about the some controlled opposition that get into the UK. This is going to be a very interesting point.
Yeah, the controlled opposition, definitely. I mean,
Yes, the controlled opposition from Hong Kong, that is, I suspect, either being manipulated or they're the agent of the CCP. We will talk about that when we're in the next stream, because I know we're running out of time.
aye, definitely. So yeah, definitely cover all of that. And like I say, I mean, any last comments about the situation? Any last comments in Hong Kong or that you'd like to add in?
For me or for the audience, are you?
Yeah, just yourself. Any
Oh,
last comments?
okay. Well, my comment is that I expect the current situation will getting worse. I mean, we have to all understand one very important thing. Collectiveness are born to be power hungry. This is very important because ultimately, if you have ever read Karl Marx, you will know that they are not about money, not about the things, they're about the power to control everything. So they're control freak. Even for the sake of argument, let's assume Xi will follow their predecessor to step down after 2 terms, and the anti-Xi movement win. The question is that they were still trying to gradually wiggle down the freedom within Hong Kong because they want to control the political freedom. And the thing is that I expect what happened is that 50 years, because they say they guaranteed it for half a century, right? They will hold a referendum, and the people and decide that the original people that's in Hong Kong will lose it. A very good case we're going to remind our friends is that Sikkim, the Indian, they're one of the states over in India. Back then, when India got independent, they still got an independent country. However, they later become a satellite state of India and finally annexed by India. What happened is that they threw a referendum, and before the referendum, India flooded the hell out of foreigners get into the Sikkim and dumped them to make sure they win this referendum. Now, yes, it is a fact that in the 1982 poll, there were 70% of people, 70, okay, of the population back then supported British rule. The trouble is that you have the immigration out before the 1997, the immigration out after 1984. You have this round of immigration out, plus every day, start from 1997, there are 150 people from the PRC that the Hong Kong government have no clue or no control they will come in for the sake of family union. You can expect they were going to vote against anything. I think it's very reasonable to say that. When I say anything, I mean vote against anything that is on the British Hong Kong Chinese on the side. That means that ultimately, if in Resolution 247, I expect the referendum will be held, the SAR status will be annexed. So it's not going nowhere. It just depends on the death rate is faster or slower.
Yeah.
That is the point. If it is Xi, the death rate will be sharply decline. If the anti-Xi movement win, well, slow death. Just saying this.
Yeah, that's good. It's quite interesting. So yeah, folk, I mean, basically covered whatever we wanted anyway. No doubt we'll get around to, discussing other things. I don't know if any last comments here in the says Stanley, Hong Kong should return to UK as UK has the treaties as a country who fulfills the contract. UK should take back Hong Kong as its own sovereign. I mean, I do agree with you. That's actually something I'll add that down, and I'll definitely get around to discussing that in the next live stream.
Please do. Yes, we have to discuss this.
100%.
I would definitely discuss this. This is a very, very interesting topic. Wow. Slangley, do come back And the next stream, make sure you remind us that if we do not say this, make sure you remind us. And I have a lot of things I want to talk about on this topic.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, some interesting comments, and that's definitely an interesting discussion we will have. So yeah, I mean, uh, so folk, I mean, at the end of the day, it's been an interesting discussion in that, you know. And like I say, we will get around to doing a talk on the whole thing, and we will get around to discussing those things that I haven't, and hopefully with things a bit more organised. 'Cause I was a wee bit rushed of recent, but I'll definitely get around to discussing all that and get around to other videos. So anyway, folk, hope you've enjoyed the video, and you know, like I say, you'll definitely get around to talking next. Okay, talk to you later.
Bye
Cheers.
bye.